Good morning. This hearing of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Energy and Water Development will please come to order. We are here today to discuss President Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the Department of Energy, including the National Nuclear Security Administration. DOE's work has a direct bearing on our national security, our international competitiveness, and our ability to tackle the climate crisis. The investments we make at DOE protect our energy grid, drive down our dependence on foreign energy, drive down energy prices, and drive forward innovation in clean energy, and so much more. At the Pacific Northwest Lab in Washington State, we are always seeing how these investments fuel cutting-edge research. But this is a constant race against the clock that is the climate crisis and against our competitors. We cannot cut investments without ceding ground. We have to make sure breakthroughs in AI, quantum computing, clean energy, and so much else are happening here in America. And while we're at it, we have to make sure the jobs that follow are staying in America too. But it's not just our economy that is at stake in the department's work. It is our national security as well. For one thing, the climate crisis is more than a rolling series of devastating weather disasters. It is also an economic threat and a national security threat, as our generals have warned us. Then, of course, DOE's management of our nuclear activities has enormous stakes for our national security. And for the sake of our families, we have to take a balanced approach where we are investing not just in weapons, but in non-proliferation work and environmental cleanup efforts. So while I appreciate the targeted increases in the President's budget for non-defense programs like improving our grid and existing energy infrastructure, developing and deploying new energy technologies, lowering emissions and tackling the climate crisis, and funding our scientific research enterprise, I have to say I want to see a better balance than increasing nuclear weapon activities by 4% to nearly $20 billion while decreasing nuclear nonproliferation and cleanup by 4.5% and over 2% respectively. Now, we proved last year that when we set partisanship aside, we are capable of working through these issues in a productive way. We wrote solid bipartisan bills for fiscal year 24 under some really tough top lines. And I even made sure we included historic funding for the Hanford nuclear cleanup in Washington State. That was huge progress, and I'm pleased to see that this budget request includes funding to meet the obligations in the holistic agreement between the Department of Energy, EPA, and the Washington State Department of Ecology, because we do have a moral and legal responsibility to do right by our Hanford workers and the Tri-Cities communities, and I will not rest until we have lived up to that. I hope we can once again make good bipartisan progress on that issue and many others. And I will remind my colleagues the only way we are going to make that happen is by working together in good faith. And unfortunately, House Republicans are already once again planning to ignore the bipartisan deal they cut last year on top lines and now push through drastic spending cuts to non-defense that are going nowhere. But just like last year, we can choose a different path here in the Senate, a bipartisan one. I know there are members on both sides who are concerned about how these tight caps will undermine our nation's strength. And as I've said from the start, I share those concerns and have made clear that any additional resources must be provided equally between the defense and non-defense sides of the ledger, because as we will talk a lot about today, both play a vital role in securing our nation's future. Our measure of success should be, what does it take to stay ahead of competitors like China and lead the industries of the future? What does it take to keep our economy strong, create jobs, and lower prices? And what does it take to keep our nation safe? In other words, what does it take to actually meet the challenges we have before us? And hearings like this are a crucial opportunity to help answer those questions. So I look forward to discussing these issues today with our witnesses and working with Ranking Member Kennedy and our colleagues to deliver the resources DOE needs to keep us on the forefront of innovation and progress and to keep America safe. With that, I will turn it over to my Ranking Member Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary and Madam Secretary, for being here. I want to apologize in advance. I've got a couple of other committees going, so I'm going to be in and out. I'd like to hear you talk today about a couple of things. First, Madam Secretary, I'm very disappointed in the administration's decision to place a moratorium on LNG permits. I don't see how that is going to further the goal of climate change. I do see how that is going to hurt America's energy independence, but equally important, it's going to hurt our friends in Europe. It's going to help our enemies, like Qatar. It looks political to me, and I'm hoping you'll be able to address that. I'd also like to talk today about whether the administration would consider, so far it hasn't, it's considered it, but it hasn't done it, advancing petroleum pit production. We've done better, but it's still not enough. I'm disappointed that the administration hasn't emphasized nuclear energy funding. I don't understand how we're going to achieve carbon neutrality without advanced small modular nuclear reactors. And the administration doesn't seem to want to talk too much about the benefits. Of course, there are costs as well, but the benefits of nuclear energy. It seems to have worked out well in countries like France, which sees its energy future, including a big role for nuclear energy. So those are the kinds of things that I'm hoping we can talk about today. But I want to end my remarks, Secretary Granholm, with a more general thought. I consider you to be one of the most intelligent and accomplished appointees by President Biden. That doesn't mean I agree with all of the positions that you have taken. I don't know to what extent you have taken those positions because you believe them or because you have been directed to take them by the White House. But I also feel like in our debate over energy transition, we're missing a major piece of the puzzle. And that's an explanation to the American people about what we're doing, why we're doing it, the costs of doing it, and the benefits, and the trade-offs. And I think you and your department should take on that responsibility. Let me try to be more specific. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bjorn Lomborg. I'm not saying that he has all the answers, but he is a visiting professor at Stanford. He's head of a think tank in Europe called the Copenhagen Consensus. He is basically a climate change economist. And in peer-reviewed studies, he predicts, for example, that in order for us to be carbon neutral, and not just the United States and the world, by 2050, and to maintain it through 2100, it will cost about 1% of the world's, not America's, but the world's GDP. Well, that doesn't sound like much until you reduce it to raw dollars. That's $27 trillion a year. That's the cost. He raises the question of whether we should spend that $27 trillion or take a portion of it and instead use it to combat the effects of climate change, which he estimates we could do successfully worldwide for $1 trillion a year. Now, you may not agree with his numbers or his analysis, but a cost-benefit analysis is worth pursuing instead of just throwing a bunch of money at the problem. For example, he raises the question, he believes that in order for China to become carbon neutral by 2050 and maintain its carbon neutrality through 2100, it will cost China $1 trillion a year. China's not spending $1 trillion a year. China, in fact, has increased its carbon emissions 300% by 1990. He raises the question, it's a fair question, what happens if China doesn't cooperate? What's the impact on world carbon neutrality? If it doesn't cooperate, is America wasting all its money? He raises the question about Russia. He thinks that Russia needs to start spending today $400 to $500 billion a year and spend that amount every year between now and 2100 to achieve carbon neutrality. It's about 3 times what Russia spends on its military. Does anyone in this room honestly believe that President Putin tomorrow is going to stand up and say, well, I'm going to stop spending money on my military and start spending it on CO2 emissions? And Professor Lumberg raises the question of, well, what happens if they don't? What happens if India doesn't cooperate? Developing countries, they want the same things as us. They want to be able to eat and live indoors, and their children to have better lives. Are we going to have to pay developing countries for their energy transition, particularly when it's cheaper for them to advance their societies using fossil fuels? These are the kind of questions that need to be hit head on, and we're not doing it. And this administration, with all due respect, has not done it. All we're doing is throwing money at a problem. And I asked, I think it was your deputy secretary, Madam Secretary, about a year or so ago, I said, if the United States government achieves carbon neutrality by 2050, and we spend the money to do it, how much will that lower world temperatures? Or how much will that decrease the increase in world temperatures? He said, I can't guarantee you that it'll lower temperatures at all, because it depends on other countries. And I think that needs to be addressed head on, and I think you're the person to do it. I don't know if the White House will let you, but the world is yearning for this. I'm going on too long. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but people are starting to figure out that they're going to have to pay for this. We see it in Germany right now. I mean, Germany said, well, we're just going to require everybody to convert to heat pumps. Now, all of a sudden, people say, well, you mean I've got to go buy a $15,000 heat pump? And so they're pushing back. And in order to have people buy into an energy transition, they've got to understand that there's an overarching plan. I'm sorry for going on so long, Madam Chair.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member Kennedy. I will now briefly introduce our panel. We have Jennifer Granholm, Secretary of the Department of Energy, and Jill Ruby, Undersecretary for Nuclear Security and Administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration. We will now proceed with your witness testimony from Secretary Granholm. You have 5 minutes for your testimony.
Great. Thank you so much. Look forward to having this conversation with all of you. So nice to be here. Chair Murray, Ranking Member Kennedy, and all the members of the subcommittee. Honored to be here to discuss the President's budget request for 2025. Honored to be here alongside Jill Ruby, who's been leading our NNSA in an extraordinary way. 3 years ago, I joined this administration believing that if America could come together around a national energy strategy, we could restore manufacturing, we could create jobs, we could address the climate crisis, and we could become energy independent and secure. And today, we are doing just that. America is back. Thanks to Congress's efforts and the President's vision, we are executing a focused, deliberate strategy that positions our businesses to dominate, our workers to compete, and our communities to thrive. And it is working. Since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, for example, companies have announced more than 600 new or expanded just the clean energy manufacturing plants on American soil. Nearly $200 billion in planned investment for batteries, for electric vehicles, solar, wind, nuclear, and more. Tens of thousands of jobs being created from Anchorage to Albuquerque, from Baton Rouge to Baltimore, from Washington to Wisconsin, and everywhere in between, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Sustaining such growth, though, requires us to complement that historic funding with durable, long-term investments. So we're grateful for a fiscal year 24 bill that appropriated more than $50 billion for the department, and the President's request for fiscal year 25 will empower us to make even greater progress. Our commercialization tools are giving American businesses the confidence to capitalize on this moment while deepening our energy security. But deepening our energy security is an ongoing project, and we need to fund it year over year. I know the subcommittee shares this imperative. Thank you for the $2.7 billion, for example, to build a domestic uranium strategy. Industry, as well as Congress's efforts to ban Russian uranium imports, which the President recently signed into law. And now we can get to work on building the domestic supply chain for civil nuclear fuel. The President's budget calls for significant appropriations for our demonstration and deployment programs, including our Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains and our Grid Deployment Office, so we can make the same progress along the energy economy. So DOE is making sure that every community can benefit from reliable, affordable, clean energy and efficiency technologies. We're leveraging dedicated funding from the infrastructure law for our interagency working group on coal and power plant communities. I've seen firsthand how this program gives communities the gift of rebirth. It instills pride for the workers who defined America's energy past and will help to power its future. We're also planning for the future by doubling down on R&D. With an $8.6 billion request for basic science research and $3 billion for applied R&D, we'll make sure that each new generation of energy technologies is more innovative than the last, from industrial decarbonization solutions to geothermal to fusion. We're also requesting $2 billion for critical and emerging technologies like AI and quantum. Both are key to economic competitiveness and defense, and DOE is uniquely positioned to drive them forward. And of course, the budget also includes an historic $25 billion for our NNSA. The growing cooperation between Russia and China and Iran and North Korea has created a more dynamic, less predictable international environment, increased saber rattling and aggression against our allies, and cyber attacks reinforce the imperative to maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. The President's request would give the NNSA the means to deliver and adapt in the face of these evolving threats, and it would advance NNSA's wider priorities around arms control and nonproliferation and counterterrorism and the safe use of civil nuclear power, as well as naval nuclear propulsion. Thanks to the bipartisan assistance we've received from Congress, America is back. We are the envy of the world. We can't afford to lose our momentum. It depends on your continued support. So thank you for the opportunity to address you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions for our panel. I ask my colleagues to keep track of your clock and try and stay within those 5 minutes. Secretary Granholm, I fought really hard to make sure the FY24 bill provided record funding for the Hanford site in Washington State, so I want to reiterate how pleased I am that the DOE, Washington State Department of Ecology, and EPA have reached this holistic agreement now for the management of Hanford's tank waste. I understand the FY25 budget request has incorporated now that holistic agreement. We know the future holds some pretty steep increases to maintain compliance. How do you plan to meet the obligations that they just agreed to in that holistic agreement, particularly for the high-level waste facility?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, the good news is that the agreement incorporates with timelines the movement forward on the high-level waste treatment via direct feed. The agreement also makes sure we've got a strong path for out-of-state grout disposal, for example, the construction of additional $1 million capacity for tank waste storage as well. We're excited to see this agreement, and we're excited to help fund it this year, obviously, to make that request. Thank you so much for your leadership in that. We also recognize we're going to need additional funding in years ahead if we are really to live up to the agreement and the path that's set forward, so we look forward to working with you on that for next year's budget.
Well, it'll be work, and I appreciate your
Yes.
consistency. I have heard concerns from the Tri-Cities community about DOE's Clean Up to Clean Energy initiative, which will use underutilized Hanford land for clean energy projects. What is your department doing to incorporate feedback from the community into that initiative?
Yeah, in all of the, we have a number of Clean Up to Clean Energy sites because of course, the legacy waste management issues that we've, or responsibilities that we have. We have met with the Tri-Cities, and we are going to continue to meet with the Tri-Cities. We know, and we're in constant contact with them about what they would like to see happen with the land. We know that there's an opportunity to have a partnership between what they would like to see on economic development and on powering that economic development with clean energy. The land has such potential for, obviously, solar, and we're excited about that. We've been meeting with the tribes as well as the community on this. We think it's really important in all of these sites that the communities are hand in glove with us on it, and we will continue, obviously, to meet with the Tri-Cities area. Tomorrow, for example, we're meeting in Savannah River at that site with the community. We have informational meetings, we have direct meetings with the communities that are adjacent and the tribes that are adjacent to make sure we have their input. So we will continue working with the community at Hanford and the other sites.
That's really important to do as we make decisions on that, so thank you. Secretary Granholm, your budget request increases funding for the Office of Science to over $8.58 billion, coming on the heels of our FY24 bill that provided $8.24 billion. This funding is important for our competitiveness, providing support to our world-class national labs and boosting scientific research, including at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. That research really drives domestic innovation across a lot of different fields: biologic and environmental research, AI, machine learning, quantum computing, clean energy technology. And I really believe that that kind of funding is really critical for our future. How does your budget request support innovation across critical emerging technologies like clean energy and AI?
So yes, on the basic research and development side, on the earlier part of the spectrum, we think that quantum, AI, fusion, all of these advanced technologies have to be funded because we are facing global competition. We are number one. We're not going to lose that spot, and that's why the support from Congress to be able to fund that basic research is so important. The 17 national labs are our jewels, as you know. You've got one in your state. The tools that are in those labs are essential for us to continue to move forward. The exascale computers, for example, we continue to be number one. We have the top 2 exascale computers in the world, and we want to continue to have that. And those are obviously important for AI as well. So on the earlier side of the spectrum, super important. You move across the spectrum from demonstration to deployment. Those are also important for us to be in the lead. We are not in the lead on deployment, but we can be. And that's why continuing to move across the spectrum is important. As you are aware, we have these joint strategy teams inside of the department to make sure that both the research and development as well as the demonstration and deployment are all speaking to one another so that we are deploying with an eye to the future. And all of that is part of the strategy of how we reorganized the Department of Energy after Bill and Ira were passed.
Okay, thank you. We know that China is investing heavily in scientific infrastructure. It's really critical that we keep pace. Senator Kennedy? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Granholm, do you believe that the world can achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 without nuclear energy playing a substantial role?
I do not.
Okay. I agree with you. I want to go back to my thesis that I hope I articulated it reasonably well. But we don't have an overarching plan or analysis for achieving CO2. In my opinion, we're just throwing money at it. Let's suppose Professor Lundberg is right, 27 trillion a year. That's worldwide to achieve carbon neutrality and maintain it through 2100. Let's assume America's share, we produce 15% of CO2 emissions. That makes our share about $4 trillion a year. That's, I don't know, 8 to 10% of our GDP. Doesn't sound like much when you talk about it that way, but it's still $4 trillion a year, every year. That's money we can't spend on health care or feeding people, housing. What happens if we start spending $4 trillion a year, each year, for every year through just 2050? And China doesn't do its part, or Russia doesn't do its part, or India doesn't do its part, or Vietnam, or Thailand. How much is our money going to reduce world temperatures, or the increase in world temperatures? The answer is zero, isn't it?
No, I don't think it's zero, but I do know that this is why we have global
But how much is it?
This is why we have all 190 countries signed on to get to net zero by 2050.
I know they've signed on, excuse me for
and
interrupting.
countries are moving in that direction, sir.
But they're not doing, I'm asking you, and I hope they do it, okay? If it turns out that the scientists are right. I'm not saying they are or they aren't. It's just that the whole topic has become so politicized. But we never talk about what happens if they don't and what is the likelihood that they will. And let me ask you again, if we spend $4 trillion a year, every year, until 2050 to achieve carbon neutrality in the United States, and President Putin and President Xi and Prime Minister Modi say, I don't think so. I think I'm going to spend that on domestic needs in my countries. How much are we going to reduce world temperatures?
With respect, I'm not going to buy into the hypothetical because they have said, I don't know about Putin, but the president of China and Prime Minister Modi have all made commitments to move in this direction and are spending money to move in this direction. But the better question is, or a parallel question would be, what happens if we don't?
Well, I'm interested in my question, though.
Well,
you're good, but I don't want you to change the subject. Have you ever known President Xi to lie?
Well, I am telling you what is in
lies on
the
occasion,
plans
doesn't he?
and what we have seen in terms of their spending. They have spent about $400 billion a year so far. That was, I think, in 2023, on renewable energy. So
What about Russia?
Spending.
What about Russia?
Spending. Russia,
Do you
I can't
honestly
speak for.
believe that
I don't have the information on Russia.
President
They're
Putin-
not very transparent.
But do
But all of these countries have signed on to the goal. And my point is, if we don't, sir, if we don't, we will be spending globally $38 trillion a year to clean up after the extreme weather events that are happening because of climate change.
But you use that figure, but I've seen no basis for it. Professor
I can send you that.
Professor Lomberg says it's much less than that. But here's my point. Do we just start spending the $4 trillion a year and spend it blindly every year like clockwork? Or at what point, if China's not pulling its load, or Russia, or Vietnam, or Sub-Saharan Africa, at what point do we say, what model do we have in place to say, whoa, wait a minute, we're wasting our money because they're not spending theirs?
I believe that the United States and its leadership in this world, as well as our allies, are not going to throw in the towel. That this is too important in terms of our world, in terms of climate change going into the future and the devastating impact it is having right now, much less in 2050.
I'm out of time, but do you trust, look me in the eye, do you trust Vladimir Putin?
No, I don't trust him.
Or President Xi Jinping to do anything other than what is in their best political interest and the power that they achieve in the world? Do you really believe that?
And in China's interest, it is in their interest to move down this path because they are experiencing extreme heat waves and death as a result of climate change. And this is why they're spending what they are. And this is why they want to dominate these clean energy technologies, because they see an economic advantage for them to be leading in this. So, no, I don't trust what they say, but we will verify.
But you're willing, well, I've gone over. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'll try to come back, or not.
Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you both for being here. I can reassure Senator Kennedy a little bit on Vietnam because I was just there, and I can tell you that we met with the second top ranking official in Vietnam, and everybody we met with was very clear. They were getting to clean energy by 2050, and that's their goal. So they talked about their concerns, significant concerns, both they and the Philippines, about climate change and the impact that it's having there. So thank you for the work that you're doing. One of the best ways to address our energy needs is through energy efficiency. And energy-saving performance contracting has been very effective. I used it when I was governor extensively. It saved taxpayers money, and it also saved thousands of pounds of pollution. Under the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've made it more possible for the federal government to use performance contracting. Can you talk about how you view that, how much that is going to be part of your recommendations, and also what DOE is thinking about in terms of trying to help states and municipalities use performance contracting?
Yeah, performance contracting is just such a no-brainer. It is something that we are using. Our FEMP unit is pushing this across the federal government and certainly inside. The funding that was given, FEMP just did a competitive grant, which it's with the AFFECT funding that, thank you very much, Congress supplied. 85% of the awardees from that grant went to performance contracting. So we believe in it. It is a win-win, and we'd like to see more of it.
And do you have any estimates on how much money we're going to be able to save the federal government by using performance contracting? And then also, if you could speak to what can be done through DOE to help states and municipalities?
Yeah, well, I will say the state energy offices we work with all the time and providing technical assistance as well as grant funding. In terms of the actual percentage of what has been saved, I'm going to get back to you on that, or the percentage or the actual numbers.
Thank you.
Because I don't have that in my notes here.
Great. Undersecretary Ruby, Russia's no longer participating in the New START treaty and has been rattling sabers about their nuclear weapons during the war in Ukraine, and also the concern about weaponizing space with nuclear weapons. So can you talk about how we are talking to our allies and partners about our own nuclear deterrent, how we are reassuring them that what we're doing is safe?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It is, the approach that we've taken in the Department of Energy and NNSA over this administration is, since we're not talking to our adversaries, let's double down on talking to our allies and partners. And we've done that. We've spent a lot of time in NATO and Asia with our partners around the world. And there is an increased knowledge and an increased interest in everything that we're doing in our weapons program and our nuclear deterrence program writ large, including our non-pro, and they are, the world is making we're making huge contributions to Ukraine, so is the rest of the world. Some of that we're doing in complete cooperation. Much of it we're doing in complete cooperation to make sure we're covering the nuclear threat. And I would just say that, we have continued, this environment is creating a great deal of cooperation, and we'll have a lot to do to continue to reassure. But at this point, I think we've really increased our communication, and there's a much better understanding of nuclear deterrence. I say the nuclear IQ is higher than it's been in a long time in both NATO and with our allies in Asia.
Well, one of those partnerships is around AUKUS with Australia and the United Kingdom. How is NNSA involved in the nuclear technology that's going to be critical to AUKUS?
Yeah, in two different ways. So in the NNSA, we do have an element of naval reactors. The naval reactors has a DoD part and a DOE part. We in the NNSA operate laboratories that design fuels for reactors, and the way the AUKUS agreement will work is those submarines that will be provided to Australia will have a completely sealed nuclear reactor. The materials will not be able to be removed. It'll be the same. Have the performance like our reactors, completely sealed, very good reactors, very good for nonproliferation. We also have a significant effort in our nonproliferation element where we're working with Australia and the IAEA to make sure that all of the systems are in place to assure the world that there's no diversion of nuclear material as a result of AUKUS.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Senator Rakowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretaries, thank you for being here, your leadership. Secretary Granholm, it's kind of fortuitous that we're having this hearing today because in Energy and Natural Resources Committee yesterday, we had a hearing on the rising energy demand and what it means as we see greater needs across all sectors for increased energy, and the fact that it just takes too darn long to complete energy projects in this country, how we bring them online, and kind of this mismatch. It is something that I look at, and if we are not more cognizant of the vulnerabilities that we have right now, we're talking a lot about bringing on intermittent sources of power, but base load is where it counts. Base load is where it counts, and this is why I've been pressing you and the folks on your team on the geothermal space. I think we've just got so much more room to run there. Hydro, we've got so many of our hydro facilities that are up for relicensing in this next handful of years, and the relicensing process takes 10 years and millions of dollars. So I'm looking at this gap coming at us, and we want to build chips facilities, we want to have data servers everywhere. One project, one training facility on our military base in Anchorage at JBER. One training facility is going to increase their energy consumption on JBER by 50%. And it's the #1 unfunded priority that we have right now within PACAV. So we're going to do it, but where are we going to get the resources from? And as I have shared with you, we've got a decline in our natural gas reserves in Cook Inlet. So I'll be damned if we're really going to import LNG from Canada, but that's where things are trending right now. So I'm looking at the timing of all of this, and I want to push you, and I need your team to be working with us. You know, you've got this great commercialization liftoff for geothermal. We want to know where the barriers are, what we need to be doing to move forward on some of these pilot projects, the research, everything that we can do to work with you to advance that. Know that we are in that with you. I want to use my time on two questions. One is critical minerals, and the other one, very quickly, is on fuel tanks. Fuel tanks. On the critical minerals, I do thank you for going back and looking at the authorities for your support for mineral projects through the Loan Program Office. You went back, you took a look at it, reevaluated the department's position, and I think it's going to be important. I'm hoping that you'll be able to provide the committee or some of us with the process on financial assistance for critical minerals and mine projects. Do the parties need to reach out to DOE? Is there a point of contact that we can direct people to? Are there certain minerals that you're looking to prioritize? Kind of help us through this in terms of what some of the conditions of the loan may be. So I'd like some information on that. And then, just as a point of curiosity, I read last week that DOD had funded 2 Canadian mineral projects. One is $6.5 million, the other is about $8.5 million. The Canadian government provided $9.2 million, so we're right in there with them. But in an interview, the Canadian Energy Minister stated that the funding from the DOD grants are, quote, no strings attached. Do you have, within DOE, any grants to mineral companies in the U.S. that have no strings attached? Because if that's the case, we've got a lot of people in line for that.
I'm not sure. I haven't read that, and I'm not familiar with the DOD process. There's usually strings attached, as you know.
To most
There's
everything.
certainly regulatory environment that we have to be cognizant of, et cetera. So I'm not sure if he was just being colloquial or if there's...
Let's follow up
Yeah.
with this if we can. I'm doing a lot of talking, not giving you a chance to answer, but I want to leave you with this. In so many of our small rural communities, their power is diesel generation. We want to get them off it. They're doing everything that they can to move towards their own little microgrid, whether it's a little bit of wind, a little bit of solar, whether it is run of river. They're working hard to get off that. But every one of these is going to need their backup generator. And so we're never going to be able to get rid of the need for that fuel. Our problem right now is they store the fuel in these fuel storage tanks, these bulk facilities. There's about a $1.5 billion in deferred maintenance issue for over 200 bulk fuel farms throughout rural Alaska. And when I say farms, I mean I'm talking like a couple tanks. We're not talking big things. But we've been working through the Denali Commission. We've got a couple million a year to allocate to these projects. But we've reached out to you at DOE. We're told that you're not aware of any grant programs that are available to tribes in rural areas to address this. But it seems to me that this should be something where the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management or the Office of Indian Energy or the Arctic Energy Office should be able to address this. So I'm using a little bit of my time to raise this as an issue with you. We're trying to work it. We need some help with your teams to identify how we can address a problem. And I think it's not just unique to us. I'm looking at my friend from New Mexico there, and I think it's probably something that you face as well.
Well, I look forward to working with you all on it. If there's no direct authorities right now, perhaps there's some that we can create. And I will be following up with you on the other issues that we discussed because I have some
Thank you.
answers. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Granholm, you actually joined me to see the very first wind towers coming off the line at Arcosa's manufacturing plant in Belen, New Mexico. And that's a great example of how the Inflation Reduction Act is literally bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And I believe that we now need to do the same for components of our power grid, things like transformers. Can you talk a little bit about how your budget request of $113 million for the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains can help ensure that we have American-made grid components?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a number of things on this. First, and thank you for your leadership on it, because we know that we may need some additional support for it. Our Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, as an example, did this with heat pumps through the Defense Production Act and was able to essentially seed domestic industry growth here. And we'd like to do the same with grid components, particularly transformers. I will say, though, that 48C gave us an opportunity to fund 6 grid transformer manufacturers in this country. So there will be that expansion, because that was a bottleneck as we try to get full supply chains back here. 48C has a wide scope, so we're excited about that. To the extent that we can work on other mechanisms to be able to enhance manufacturing in the U.S., we'd be excited to do that and excited to work with you on it.
Great. Yeah, I think transformers are a real, as you know, bottleneck right now, and something we should be making here for our own security. Administrator Ruby, I understand that Los Alamos National Laboratory will need more power than its existing power lines can handle by as soon as potentially 2027. And to address that, NNSA decided that building a new transmission line was going to be necessary. Now, I know when NNSA first looked at this, energized reconductoring felt like a little bit of a stretch, but we've seen enormous progress since then. Is energized reconductoring something you'd be willing to evaluate to meet Llano's power needs?
Yeah, thanks, Senator Heinrich. The answer is yes. We have to, of course, this is a big process of making sure that we're working with all the stakeholders in New Mexico. The first time we looked at reconductoring, it actually required larger areas to set it up that the tribes were worried about, sensitive. So we just need to, there has been a lot of progress made in the 2 years since we last looked at that. And we will have another look to see if anything significant has changed. Meanwhile, we'll in parallel move along because, as you mentioned, 2027 is not that far, and we want to continue to do this. So we'll keep the process moving that we have right now, the NEPA process, but we'll take another look at reconductoring. I think it makes sense.
I appreciate that. And I've heard concerns from the tribes about the current proposal as well, so I just think we need to evaluate all our options here. Administrator Ruby, during my tenure in Congress, I've worked really hard to nearly double the budget at Los Alamos National Lab, but as you know, with that growth comes a lot of growing pains, and particularly in housing. What can we do to make sure that we're addressing the housing challenges that face Los Alamos in particular?
Yeah, Senator Heinrich, this is a good question. For those of you who know Los Alamos, its land is limited on the mesa, and housing is expensive and in high demand. So we've done a couple of things. We probably need to do more, but we've opened an office in Santa Fe so that people who aren't working in the labs but are working in offices can be closer to other housing, not Santa Fe, but also a broader region. We've also looked at options on the other side of the lab to see if there are some things that we could do to open office spaces in northern, on the north side. And that's still being evaluated. We've offered housing assistance to the temporary workers, construction workers in the area so that we can get them there to work on, in particular, the plutonium facility. So I think we've addressed this in a few ways. We can't create more land on the mesa, so we're trying to be creative about the options that we can provide.
Great, thank you.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chair Mary, and thank you both to our witnesses today for your leadership in America's energy security and for delivering on the promise of landmark legislation, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. You are really delivering a next-generation energy future for America. And since the last time we held this budget hearing, Delaware and the Mid-Atlantic region have been selected for one of the hydrogen hubs, which has potential to be transformational for my region and to give it an opportunity to really participate in the hydrogen economy of the future. We have several iconic Delaware companies that are at the leading edge of electrolyzer technology, and we have 3 oil refineries at the head of the Delaware Bay in 3 states that are committed to a transformation towards hydrogen production and deployment if we can get this right. Madam Secretary, how are you making sure that each of the hubs gets the support and the flexibility they need to achieve liftoff? I'm concerned about flexible matching requirements in particular so that we can not just put out a big grant announcement, but actually strike the right balance between private sector partners, public sector investment, and getting hydrogen secured as a next generation fuel.
Yeah, this is such an important issue. We want these hubs to succeed, and we know we have to carve this with a scalpel and not with an axe. The 45V requirements, I know, have been put out. We have received 20 or 30,000 comments from stakeholders on all sides and Treasury, and with the assistance of DOE, we are wading through the comments to make sure that we get it right. Suffice it to say, the Biden administration is deeply invested in making a hydrogen economy successful in this country. We are, I can tell you, in meeting with all of my counterparts across the world, we are really the envy of the world because we have such a diverse array of hydrogen, of inputs for these hydrogen hubs. So we are looking at it, we're evaluating, and we want to get it right.
Thank you. In our particular case, I worry about a cash flow crunch in terms of what's the timing of the matching requirements, and I want to make sure we get this right, and I very much look forward to working with you on that. CHIPS and Science also helped authorize a new foundation for your department, FESI, the Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation, which is a tool many other federal agencies and entities have used to attract and deploy private sector funding. In fact, I was thrilled that in part because of funding from this subcommittee, there was the announcement of the inaugural board of directors a few weeks ago. What are the key challenges facing the Department of Energy that you think would benefit from public-private partnership, from philanthropic capital and coordination?
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thank you for your leadership on this. I know this has been in the works for a long time, and there was such a sense of joy when we finally announced the board members and it was funded to be able to get it launched. I know the board is, it's a mixture of people with a variety of talents, and so they're interested in the spectrum of things that they might be helpful on, but I do know there is a wealth of opportunity in the space of taking ideas from labs to commercialization. And so helping those and getting a sense of the spectrum from all of the various labs, I mean, there's just it's so rich in that environment. They're very interested in leaning in on that. So I think that is a very big way they can help. I'd say there's one other way that's not so technically involved, which is to help us think through and maybe help to supply technical assistance to, for example, tribes and other areas, rural areas where the region might not, is not equipped to be able to navigate the bureaucracy of the federal government to apply for a grant or a loan. So those kinds of things, they're looking at the vast array of it, but thank you so much for giving us this assist at the department, even though it's totally independent and bipartisan. It'll be a great assist to the department going well into the future.
My most bipartisan bill in this area is the Prove It Act with Senator Kramer that has 14 bipartisan co-sponsors, and it just advanced out of EPW, I think by a vote of 14-5 in January. And NETL, the whole suite of national labs will be critical to gathering data about emissions intensity. Any thoughts you want to share about what resources you might need as a department? Obviously, Commerce, USTR, State, EPA, there'd be a whole range of participants, but it would really be DOE-led. Any thoughts about what actually gathering emissions intensity data to advance industrial decarbonization might look like for the department?
Well, I hope the authorizers and the appropriators come together on providing some resources to make this happen. But the bottom line is, I think it's an incredibly important bill for our competitive advantage. If we're manufacturing products, we need to know what that footprint looks like, and this is one way to be able to do that and to keep it updated. So thank you for your leadership on it. I can see why it's so overwhelmingly supported.
And I'm simply going to reinforce what two of my colleagues said. The domestic transformer manufacturing bottleneck is something I hear about constantly from the Delaware Electric Co-op. And Senator Shaheen's been a leader as long as I've been here on performance contracting and energy efficiency. And in my previous role in FSGG, I try to give some lift to performance contracting. Anything I could do to be helpful, I'd like to. Thank you for your forbearance, Madam Chair.
Yes. Senator Heinrich, do you have additional questions?
Sure, thank you. Secretary Granholm, New Mexico is well poised to be a top geothermal energy producer, something that's getting a lot more attention now. I think, I wish we had been sort of further along the trajectory of understanding just how close we are to advanced geothermal productivity in this country when we passed the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
In New Mexico, we've got not only the resources, but the skilled workers from the oil and gas industry, very similar skill set. We've got Sandia's geothermal research program backing us up. And your department estimates that new geothermal technology could give us as much as 90 gigawatts of clean energy by 2050. So one of the things I'm doing is pushing for a $125 million carve-out to start funding demonstration projects for advanced geothermal technology. Can you talk a little bit about how this investment could help DOE reach its goals for advanced geothermal and just the state of the technology right now? Because I don't think people understand, like, we're on the verge of something really, really big here.
Yeah, it's amazing, and thank you for looking at that. I agree that if we had, been more expansive in the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we might have been able to address this. But thank you for considering plussing up our efforts in geothermal. If we do that, we will be able to prove out that you can have geothermal in a variety of geologies, in a variety of locations, even where the resource is deeper into the surface because of the advances made in hydraulic fracturing technology from the oil and gas industry. This is why, speaking of bipartisanship, this is such a bipartisan, I think, the notion of geothermal is a very bipartisan issue, and I'm hopeful that we can do that. So we've done this enhanced geothermal liftoff report, as you noted. It has identified specific barriers that we're breaking down, but honestly, so many of those barriers now end up being market barriers, et cetera, because the technology barriers through efforts like Fervo and others, they are breaking down. And the tech world is reaching out to these companies that are doing this enhanced because they would like to see data centers paired with geothermal to get that firm baseload power, which we are very encouraging of. So we're excited about the potential breakthroughs. I just want to see the funding commensurate with the potential. And so thank you for your leadership on it.
Absolutely, because I think we've known for a long time, or for a substantial amount of time, how to decarbonize the first 80% of the power sector. It's that last 20% that has been so elusive, and now we have technology that works, and we just need to bring it down the cost curve. And there's no doubt in my mind that this is another distributed technology that can be brought down the cost curve. Department of Energy recently announced a major proposal to perform groundbreaking work at the intersection of artificial intelligence, science, energy, national security. Can you talk a little bit about how the national labs, Los Alamos, Sandia, and others will be incorporated into that project?
Yeah, and I feel free to toss to Administrator Ruby as well. But the President's executive order on AI has unleashed a whole swath of activity across agencies. Obviously, because of the national labs, we are the places where we do have those exascale computers and where the tools for leading in AI exist. The president's executive order set forth deadlines, shot clocks, et cetera. We've been meeting all of them. One of the important ones is to be able to train up 500 AI researchers and scientists, and that is going to be critical for not just the federal government, but across the span of things. We're concerned on the plus side of AI, of having enough power, but we think that AI can help to solve some of that because AI can teach us how to be more efficient as well. And in fact, I think NVIDIA just announced that they have halved the energy use of their chips, which is great, but there's still more that needs to be done on that. And we're also concerned about the negative uses of AI as well. Let me just toss it over to Administrator Rudy.
I love when it gets negative. So just to pick up on that, we are, another role that the department has, and NNSA in particular has, is red teaming AI models and looking for issues that our adversaries might use. And we are really like, we need the computers, we need the models, and we need to do good things with them, and we need to make sure nobody else is taking advantage of them or finding information. So we are really well along in that in NNSA, and we will, that's an important role that we'll play.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Coons, did you have any additional questions? Thank you. I'll turn it to Senator Hoeven in just a second, but while he's getting settled, I just wanted to follow up on what Senator Coons talked about on the hydrogen hubs. The Pacific Northwest was selected for a $1 billion award, along with the 6 other sites. The Treasury Department's proposed 45V rulemaking has thrown up some really big roadblocks, and all 7 of the hydrogen hubs have now made it clear that those rules need revisions for them to work. Major companies in this space have already announced that they're going to pull back hydrogen investments unless there are changes. You're not in charge of Treasury, but their final rule will affect the success of these hydrogen hubs. And I wanted to ask you, are you working with the administration to make sure that the final 45V rule helps rather than hinders in this process?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Very important. I mean, your point is super important, and that's why those 20,000 comments that we received, they are painstakingly being reviewed, and we just got to make sure these work.
Yeah, we do.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary, good to see you. Thanks for being here. I want to ask you about both the Clean Power Plan 2.0 and also MATS. And MATS particularly has an impact on lignite coal more so than other types of coal. I think you're aware of that. We've had you out to North Dakota, so I know you know quite a bit about our industry. But the independent grid operators, including PJM, Southwest Power Pool, which of course is, we have both MISO and Southwest Power Pool, and we supply power to about 9 states out of North Dakota, coal-fired electric power. But PJM, SPP, and ERCOT all have indicated that they think that these 2 rules are going to be a huge problem in terms of keeping enough base load for grid reliability. And I have full letters from all 3 of them. Madam Chairman, I'd ask to be made part of the record. Without objection. Expressing those concerns regarding these 2 EPA rules as promulgated by EPA. You know, we're going to need some help here. As you know, we're leading the way on these carbon capture, both for coal gasification, which is already in place, but also for carbon capture on coal-fired electric plants, both on the RUS side, the co-op side, and on the private investor-owned side. But with these rules, we're not going to get there. And you've got hundreds of millions invested with us in these projects.
I respectfully disagree that we're not going to get there. In fact, when the EPA put out its proposed rule, it took in feedback, listened to the concerns of the power authorities, and pushed back the date by which coal plants, existing coal plants, would have to install carbon capture equipment. The question is it technologically feasible? You have proved out that it is technologically feasible. And we have financing mechanisms to help fund the installation. So we think it is, it's not just think, we have done this analysis with them. We have an MOU with the EPA, and we think that, you know, I understand people being worried about it, but by, you know, in the 2030s, it will be, people will see that it's doable, and you guys have been the example of how that's possible.
We're doing it both for geologic storage now and EOR, both. And these projects now are coming online. So now I've already talked to EPA Administrator Michael Regan about coming out, and I'm going to bring him out, as long as he agrees to come, to the EERC where you've already visited.
Yeah.
And I know, or I believe it was beneficial for you. I think it will be helpful to him, but he needs to talk to our experts about how we are going to address these rules. And we're going to need flexibility under these rules if we're going to be able to move forward. So I would ask for your assistance, for Deputy Secretary Turk's assistance, for EPA assistance on this.
Yeah, we've got the technology, we've got the ability, we can do this, and we'd be happy to partner on it.
Let me also ask you about the cooperative agreements. That relates to EERC. They've had cooperative agreements with DOE since, I think, going back into the 1980s. We need to renew that. As you know, they're not only doing all this work in the carbon capture area, but they are the leader on the Headwaters Hydrogen Hub, which covers Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. I'd like to ask that you would work with us to reauthorize it. It's up, I think, next year, but it needs to be reauthorized, and they have ongoing projects. So we do need to reauthorize our cooperative agreement. Now, the funding, of course, we do that separately. So that doesn't guarantee them funding, right? We work on that through appropriations, but they have to have the authorization to continue to work projects.
So, you know, we love EERC, and they have been a partner with DOE for many, many years.
You can say that again if you want.
That ERC, over the past few years, I think the past 5 years, they've won 9 competitive awards because they are so
They're doing a lot of work.
incredibly capable. We are trying to move in the direction of more competitive relationships,
I know.
though, and
Hence,
so-
I
and they
expressed the
compete.
difference between authorization and the appropriation. And that's very important, because we need to keep those agreements. Now, whether you end up giving them an award, we'll work with you on that. But they've got to have the underlying authorization for continuity of projects, and then they compete on the awards, just like anyone else. So that's where I'd ask for your help, and if you would direct the Deputy Secretary. He's been very good working with us, or authorize or support, but that's where we need to get to.
Yeah.
So if you have questions about that, relative to the competitive aspect you all are working on, I'm happy to work on that, but I need your help to work on it.
We will continue to work with you, but as you know, even on this committee, there has been a push toward competition, and so we want to, we love all of our masters.
Yeah, no, I understand. Could I ask one more question?
Of course.
Madam Chair, and this is actually for Undersecretary Ruby, the warheads for the Sentinel program, ICBM. Right, as you know, that the Sentinel's undergoing a Nunn-McCurdy review. And Air Force is working diligently on that. I've talked to them a lot about it. But I want to make sure, but it's not a technological issue. Mainly, so they got to pour so darn much concrete that it's just a construction issue, It's like building the interstate system again in some respects for a lot of that area. Are you staying on track and on top of what you have to do both for Sentinel and for the LRSO, the cruise missile warhead? They're two different warheads.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, the Sentinel warhead, we call the W87-1. And we're just, as Nunn-McCurdy is proceeding, we're proceeding with the W87-1 warhead on the schedule that we currently have. We're asked to be an observer of the Nunn-McCurdy process, so we stay well aware of what's going on there. And when it's finished and there's a decision made, then we'll make sure we sync up our timelines again. It's important for us that we have a flight test for our warhead development program, so that will be where we have to, that's the particular point where we really want to make sure we stay synced up. On the 80-4, we're well aligned, and it's pretty far along in its development, and we'll be making a lot of W80-4s to put on the standoff weapon before long.
Yeah, incredibly important at this time with what's going on in China and
is.
Russia. So
Yep.
thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That will end our hearing today, and I want to thank our witnesses and my colleagues for participating. I look forward to working together on this year's appropriation bill to make sure we are providing the Department of Energy with the resources they need. I will keep the hearing record open for 1 week. Committee members who want to submit written questions for the record should do so by 5 p.m. Wednesday, May 29th. We appreciate the Department of Energy to responding them in a reasonable period of time. We stand adjourned.